We will begin by introducing the candidates in alphabetical order. We have former Senator Mark Begich, a Democrat, former State Senator Mike Dunleavy, a Republican, Scott Hawkins, also running in the Republican primary, Mead Treadwell, who recently entered the Republican primary, and Governor Bill Walker, running as an independent. So let's give these gentlemen a big hand for making it a priority to come to rural Alaska. They're getting a standing ovation.
All right, I'll join that.
See how much it means for you folks to be here. Now, from here on out, though, I do have a special request to make. I ask that you withhold your applause until the end, and when these candidates give their final statements, you may applaud to your heart's content. But let's try to keep things moving so we can get more questions in and move on. So please hold your applause until the end. Now, reminders, cell phones off, I hope. We don't want them ringing here. And the other thing is we have to address the ground rules. We do have time limits. And Phyllis Lawson, raise your hand. She is watching the time for us, keeping an eye on the clock. And then Kitty Wilson will give you your signals. Now, you will hear the bell ring when your time is up. So would you ring the bell for us? Now, if you keep going beyond your time, she will keep ringing it. So be gentlemen tonight. And just before you reach your 1-minute time mark, she will hold up this yellow card for you. That means you have 10 seconds to wrap up your statements. So this is a very important thing that you follow your time limits, and I will warn you now that if you are a serial abuser of the time limit, then I will have to deduct time elsewhere in the debate from your responses, just to make sure that we keep an even keel here. So for round one of our debate, we will begin with questions from our panelists, and each of you will get to respond to the same question. You will have 1 minute to respond, and we will rotate the start of each round with a different candidate. So we begin alphabetically with Mark Begich. So Lainey, take it away.
I thought they would be making opening statements.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me. We have, I skipped ahead. I was so anxious for the questions. So Mark, begin with opening statements.
Well, first, thank you very much, Rhonda. Thank you all for showing up on a beautiful day out there and being inside here, and all the people who are listening. Also to the Little Angel Child Care Center for putting together really the first full debate of the governor's candidates, and to the candidates that are here. It's going to be an interesting night, I guarantee you. I'm running for governor because of so many of the topics that you all outlined in this debate, from jobs, economy, increasing crime, substance abuse, our environment, and the safety and health of all our communities throughout Alaska. When a majority of Alaskans believe our state is headed in the wrong direction, it is time to put new faith and new vision back into our leadership. The stakes in Alaska have never been higher, but I know that together we can build an incredible state, not only for today, but for generations to come. I entered this race because I believe I can bring the leadership and the ideas that not only talk about the challenges we have in this day, but also what we can do to build Alaska for the next 10, 20 plus years. This is what I believe is missing in the debate of the governor's race so far. So I look forward to your questions. To the panelists, thank you very much. Some of you I've been subjected to before, so I'm looking forward to that. Thank you again.
Mike Dunleavy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for putting this on. It's a beautiful day here in Bristol Bay, and it's just great to be here. Just a little bit about myself. I was a senator for 5 years, decided to hop into the race to also make sure that Alaska stays on a course that's prosperous and opportunities are available for everyone. Spent almost 20 years of my life in rural Alaska, northwest Alaska. Where I met my wife for 31 years. She's from the village of Norvik, and was an educator in rural Alaska, was a principal, teacher, superintendent up in northwest Alaska for many years. I understand rural Alaska, and I understand a lot of the issues that we're facing today that we'll be discussing. We have tremendous opportunities here in Alaska if we're able to harness our resources. Mostly in rural Alaska is where the resources are located. Just like here, we've got fishing. We've got other opportunities out here as well. But rural Alaska is where the state of Alaska gets its resources and gets its revenue from. And so I think it's very important that we have this debate today and this discussion. Thank you.
Right, Scott Hawkins.
Good evening. My name's Scott Hawkins. I'm really happy to be here. I will confess to you, this is my first visit to Naknek and King Salmon, and I really have to commend the organizers for putting on this weather for me. I understand it's not always like this, so this is great, and I really appreciate the hospitality of everybody. Just the standing ovation that you gave us. I'm not sure that we really deserve that, but very, very hospitable of you. And then when I arrived, I was picked up by Mayor Dan and given the full tour of King Salmon and Naknek. Now, he wants you to know we did not talk politics. But we did talk a lot about Naknek and King Salmon. And then your Borough Assemblyman Shelby gave me a second tour where I got a full briefing on the area's sewer system. So I am up to speed. I come from a business background. I've not held elected office before. I think that distinguishes me from the rest of the panel up here. I'm a bit like Donald Trump, but without the bad Twitter habit in that regard. So I'm running for office for much the same reason that Mark and Mike articulated. The poll numbers show that over 70% of Alaskans believe that Alaska is on the wrong track. And I feel that I've got the perspective, the energy, the new kind of the fresh eyes to come in, and with my background in business and economic development, I think we can turn this state around and get ourselves back on the right track. Thank you.
Mead Treadwell.
Good evening. Scott, welcome to Naknek. It's great to see you here, and it's wonderful for everybody, for me to be there. I know, but as an Alaskan, I have always looked at this area as great ground zero for the center of a fishing industry that is so incredibly important to Alaska. It was important before statehood, it was important before oil, and it's going to be important no matter what else happens in oil. I joined the Republican primary basically because I was not happy with the choices, and many others called and said that they weren't happy with the choices in the Republican primary. I am a dad. I've raised 3 kids after my wife died, one kindergartner, one first grader, one fifth grader. They've all grown up now. One son was a commercial fisherman out here, a salmon fisherman. And I've worked in business and in government. I served as your lieutenant governor. And I've worked for many, many years on big fights. My first job in Alaska was with Wally Hickel, where we were working on the 200-mile limit, on what got us the capability to Americanize the fisheries. Ted Stevens and Jay Hammond really helped make that happen. I worked during the Exxon Valdez oil spill, some of it with Governor Bill Walker, to make sure that we had marine safety. And when I was lieutenant governor, I really focused on marine safety. I worked on fish quality when I was at DEC. I've worked on many of the issues around creating the CDQ program, which has been so tremendous for Western Alaska. And I'm a very strong supporter of the CDQ program. I believe that we have to manage for abundance. I believe we have to have transparent systems to make sure that people understand that they have their say in the way our fisheries are managed. And I'm known as somebody who works very, very well with people across the aisle to get things done. And I'm very proud to be here tonight. Thank you very much.
Governor Bill Walker.
Good evening. It's great to be back. A beautiful day, a beautiful area, very, very special. You know, I think we all are who we have been as far as what we've done in our life. So I want to just mention my background a little bit. I'm a Christian. I'm a husband of 41 years. I'm the father of 4 children. I'm a grandfather of 5 children. I'm a carpenter. I'm a journeyman carpenter. I'm a plumber. I've been a fisherman, a janitor, woodcutter, pretty much anything you could do to survive growing up in Delta Junction in the before statehood. I was born in the territory of Alaska, and most of my time was spent in Valdez. Any commercial fishing time was certainly in Valdez. Went through a few things in my time in Alaska. An earthquake in '64 was certainly defining for my family, as we were in the construction business, and so it sort of formed who I am. My background, things I've been through, is really what has made me be the person that I am today. I am the governor. I am governor with Lieutenant Governor Byron Malott, which is an incredible blessing to me. I've enjoyed being part of the Unity ticket. I'm the only nonpartisan independent governor in the nation, and I think that works well for Alaska when it's working with various administrations in Washington. And I certainly want to acknowledge Speaker Edgmond here as well tonight, and I've enjoyed working in the legislature as a nonpartisan governor, being able to work across the aisle. For me, there are no aisles because I'm just an Alaskan. So I'm very proud of our cabinet. Our cabinet is very bipartisan. Some have looked at our cabinet and said, you know, we see Republicans, we see Democrats, we see independents. What are you folks? I said, we're Alaskans. We're a group of about 25 Alaskans, and every decision we make is what's best for Alaska. We leave any party initials at the door. We don't keep score of how many we have of one versus the other. It doesn't matter. As long as your passion is for Alaska, that's what it was all about. So that's allowed us to do some things that I don't think otherwise we could have done, especially in this last legislative session when we saw 113 bills pass. So I think we've had the opportunities I don't think we would have had without being the nonpartisan, being the Unity ticket, and very, very proud to be governor with Lieutenant Governor Byron Mallott.
All right, thank you very much, candidates, for your opening statements. We will begin our round of panelist questions with Lainey Welch, and we will address our first question to Mark Begich and then continue our rotation. Lainey?
What is your position on the Pebble Mine?
Pretty simple, hasn't changed. I am opposed to Pebble Mine. I think, as the late Ted Stevens said, it's the wrong mine, the wrong place. I think it would damage the long-term health of an incredible fisheries in this region. I think there are steps that could be done as governor that have not been done, to be very frank with you. I think when people say they're against it, they should be against it all the way, and I will tell you the first thing I would do as governor of Alaska, as I'm opposed to Pebble Mine, I would also make sure the Corps of Engineers knows that state land or state right-of-way or state access would not be part of any of their plans. Therefore, the state would not participate in that effort, which I believe would finally put an end to this project, and also finally end the divisiveness that has caused not only here in this region, but honestly throughout Alaska. This issue never goes away, it seems. It's like Groundhog Day. It keeps coming back and coming back. So I'm opposed to it, and I would take steps immediately to ensure that the state is not a participant.
Same question, Mr. Dunleavy.
It's difficult for me to answer until it goes through the process, through the study process. Once that data is collected, once we can examine that data, then I think a final decision can be made. If the Pebble Mine is going to endanger the fisheries or other resources in the area, I think we all should be against it. But I don't have that answer until we go through that process. And I do think there's a danger, to be honest with you, in politicizing this process, the permitting process that we have, the study process that we have. And again, I think we should examine it. We should take a look at it. And if in the end it's not a good project, we shouldn't have it. We shouldn't have it permitted, and we shouldn't have it go into process. But it's difficult to answer that question until we go through that process.
Same question, Mr. Hawkins.
Yes, the Pebble Mine does raise a lot of difficulties. There's a lot of concerns with it. I think as a practical matter, it's losing momentum as a project. You see where the latest investor just pulled out. That investor follows Anglo-American pulling out, who follows Rio Tinto pulling out. All the big hitters in the mining industry have decided that it just doesn't work on a couple of different levels, and a lot of it is just how tremendously controversial it is to the people in this region. I think it may well be the wrong mine in the wrong place, and I think it, as a project, it hurts the mining industry because it is so tremendously controversial. I think the project has a legal right to go through the permitting process, but it needs to be held to an incredibly high standard, because if anything at all goes wrong, there is just so much at stake.
I'm Mead Treadwell. My position is that I will not trade one resource for another. If this mine cannot meet the kind of water quality standards, the kind of habitat protection standards that we've created as Alaskans to protect our fisheries all over the state, then it won't happen. I was a deputy commissioner of DEC during a very tough time of rewriting our water quality standards, and one of the things that we did is we looked at several different mines. The Fort Knox mine around Fairbanks was permitted. The AJ mine around Juneau did not make it through the process. And from what I've seen, it's going to be very, very hard for this mine to make it through the process. But I will say this, I will not fool you about the public process. And Mark, when you were in the Senate, the EPA tried to veto it ahead of even having had a chance to go in. And that's like saying that, you know, if you failed math, nobody in your gene pool could even take math. It does not make sense to try to cook the books on the public process. It makes the sense to have a strong public process where we get through and get to analyze what's happening.
Governor Walker?
When Lieutenant Governor Malott and I ran for Governor, Lieutenant Governor, we were very clear, we're fish first. We will not trade a renewable fish for a non-renewable, and we were very clear about that. And we have been that throughout our administration. We have reactivated the Bristol Bay Advisory Committee. I'm a big believer in local input. I think those closest to the issue are closest to the solution, so we listen closely to that. I have been pretty clear that I'm not in favor of that mine. I'm very concerned about that mine. I'm concerned about what it could do, and you know, I got in an interesting discussion with a group about that, and they said it can be done safely, and my response was, what if it doesn't? What if it doesn't? Look at all that's at risk and you know, Alaska has $4.7 trillion of resources in the ground. That's not the right place to put a mine. So I'm very pro-development, I'm very pro-mining, not in that location. That's a that's a risk that I'm not willing to take as a governor.
Margie Bauman has our next question. We begin this round with Mike Dunleavy.
Yes. I would like to know your position on the Stand for Salmon initiative. Please explain it.
I don't support the Stand for Salmon initiative.
Well, please explain why.
Because I think the way the initiative is put together, I believe there's a number of projects throughout the state that could be at risk, and this is a resource state. We need to develop our resources. We need to develop our resources responsibly. And I think you know, these projects should be viewed separately and held to a permitting and processing standard. I just don't think an initiative such as the Stand for Salmon initiative, I don't think it's good for Alaska, so that's why I oppose it.
Scott Hawkins?
Yeah, I would echo Senator Dunleavy's concerns on that. The Stand for Salmon initiative, I think, would have a lot of unintended consequences. I know it's been presented as something that's very pro-fish and very innocuous and very beneficial, but I think if you look at it carefully, the devil's in the details. I think you find that, that it would shut down a lot of things in this state. It's not that our permitting process couldn't do with some tightening up. We need to have a permitting process that knows how to say no. Just because you apply for a permit should not mean that at the end of the day you're going to get a permit basically on your terms with a few little adjustments. We need to be the place on the planet that knows how to do things right. And in order to have that, we need to have a very stringent permitting system. We need to be efficient and not be nonsensical, but it needs to hold projects to very high standards, and it needs to be able to say no. I don't think the Stand for Salmon initiative is the way that we get there.
Mead Treadwell?
I don't support the Stand for Salmon initiative. I, as I said before, helped write water quality laws and water quality rules in this state. There is a way now to identify what's in an at-risk stream. If it's in an at-risk stream, it needs to be protected. There's been mapping of that sort of thing, and what this bill does is it essentially assumes that everything is when it's not. We fought hard as Alaskans to get 103 million acres in our statehood land grant. That's the size of California. The Alaska Native corporations fought hard to get 44 million acres back after that. And the point is that this would take away your property rights without protecting the fish. And that's why most of the Native corporations, that's why I believe most Alaskans will oppose this initiative. Do I stand for salmon and believe that we need to protect salmon? Absolutely. I don't think this is the right law to do it.
Bill Walker.
You know, while I am strong against the Pebble mine, I'm concerned about the Stand for Salmon, what it could do. But I look beyond that. I think the reason we have the Stand for Salmon is the fact that coastal zone management went away many years ago. And I think the problem with when you take that away, you've taken away local input into the process. Local input should be at the beginning of the process, not after the decision's made and you have 3 minutes to testify how do you feel about it. So coastal zone management was something I thought what gave the peace of mind to those in areas where development was going to take place, that they would be involved in the process early on and assured that. So I think this is what happens when you take away the local input. This is you meet them on initiative ballots or you meet them in the courtroom, and I think that's unfortunate. So while I don't support it, I certainly understand that local input is critical in the process, and so but to be clear, I don't support the Stand for Salmon.
Mark Begich.
Well, first off, the issue around Title 16, which is the laws that govern this issue, that's why it's in front of us. There is a bill by a legislator from Kodiak that did not move forward, and to me that is a challenge when there was an opportunity to fix this. As you know, it's in the courts. They haven't made a decision yet. I'm anxious to see that, and at that point I'll take a position based on what the courts do to it or not. But I will say this very clearly. The laws of Title 16 should be revamped and reviewed. That has not been done. Matter of fact, it's a clear symbol of what's wrong and what's broken in Juneau. When you have almost 50,000 people that bring forward an initiative, you have to respect their views and figure out how to fix this problem that they are expressing of keeping our salmon and making sure it's preserved for generations to come. This is one of the reasons I ran, because the system is broken. This issue that the governor has brought up on the coastal zone management, that's a great idea. The feds took it away because the Parnell, Mead, Treadwell administration didn't do anything on it. And second, all you have to do is bring back a piece of legislation and move it forward. So that's my position on it at this point.
All righty, so we move to our next questioner, Bill Hill, who is superintendent of the Bristol Bay Borough School District. And we begin this round of questioning with Scott Hawkins.
Good evening. What are your thoughts on education funding? Do you believe that there should be any reductions in education funding? And what do you see as a long-term sustainable plan for Alaska's education system?
Okay, good question, Bill. The state's running a massive deficit and has been for years, and we need to find cost savings everywhere. I don't think any category is completely off limits. I don't believe that education should bear the brunt of efforts to reduce spending in the state. We do need to reduce spending in the state gradually and carefully and intelligently. And I think when it comes to education, the important thing is to protect the amount of resources that are going into the classrooms and the teachers. We're in this state, very top-heavy in administration. If you look at our school districts and benchmark them against others across the country, we have very top-heavy administrations. We can do with less administration and actually not affect the classrooms at all. In fact, having fewer administrators running around telling teachers how to teach and stifling creativity by laying down all these requirements of how and what must be taught, we need to free teachers up and let them be creative and teach kids like they used to.
Mead Treadwell.
Thank you. And Superintendent Hill, we had a chance to talk before the debate, and I'm going to give you the same answer I gave you there. Is I want to see more money go into the classroom. I have a brother who's a school teacher in Michigan. What he's paid is probably less than a barista makes. And he's got a PhD, and it's a very, very tough thing all over the country, and that's why you're seeing teacher walkouts for salaries. I want to see more local teachers, especially in rural Alaska. We bring lots of teachers in. They are here for a short time. It makes it very hard to have language programs that maintain language currency in the state, and it makes it very, very hard to have good cultural affinity with the students they're teaching. You and I talked about the kinds of regulations that drive up your costs that really aren't necessary to do the job. And finally, I'll just say this, as someone who has argued for choice, I think the choice issues are very different in urban Alaska than they are in rural Alaska, and we've got to understand that.
Thank you. We go to Bill Walker.
You know, this year we began the Alaska Education Challenge, and we brought, rather than bringing consultants in, we brought in teachers, parents, some students, school board members to work on what can be done in the educational system in Alaska on a broad base. Separate from that, I've long felt that we have the wrong items on the menu, or at least not enough items on the menu in the school system. I'm a passionate supporter of career and technical education. I've been to the Naknek Career Center in Nome, Star of the North in Kotzebue. It's so successful in Kotzebue, they're adding on to that. We need to make sure when they got out of high school, they have an opportunity to go into a trade. They have and have that tailored to the region that they're in. And I just feel that sometimes the menu is assuming everyone's going to go on to a secondary school, on to college someplace. I'd love to see those that work on the North Slope, I'd like to see them commute to Naknek rather than New Hampshire. So I think we need to have Alaskans in those positions.
Mark Begich.
I'm a product of the school system here in the state, the public school system. My parents were teachers, my sisters were teachers. Education is part of who we are, but also education is a critical part of growing any economy, keeping a community together. And so when your questions are funding and sustainability, so first off, I've laid out an idea that does both. I believe that the permanent fund should be put in the Constitution with 40% of those revenue streams going to fund education as the Constitution says. It's the obligation of the state to fund. Take it off the table. Every year, the legislature leaves that at the end to play games with our educational system as a bargaining chip, back and forth, back and forth. I'd like to take it off the table to make sure that if they're going to use the permanent fund in any way, put it toward education and make sure that we have a long-term plan and stability for our educational system, not only in rural Alaska, but throughout. That's your question on funding and stability. That's how I would do it.
Mike Dunleavy.
Thank you. As mentioned earlier, I spent my entire career has been education in the state of Alaska. Much of it in rural Alaska, in small schools up in the Seward Peninsula and up in Kotzebue. I, too, am a product of public education. So aren't my kids, my wife, my entire family. And as a teacher, principal, and superintendent in Alaska, this issue has always been a perennial issue for educators and school districts. There's a number of things that are driving up the cost of education in the state of Alaska. And school districts have a responsibility to lobby the legislature for funding because they can't create their own funding stream. They get the funding from the state of Alaska. But things such as escalating healthcare costs that are out of control need to be reined in. We need to work on that because that's increasing at several 8% a year or more. That's impacting the budgets of these school districts. But one of the things that we're not talking about, which I think is important as well, is the outcomes of students. A month and a half ago, the NAEP scores, which are given nationally, showed Alaska's dead last. We need to increase the funding. We need to deal with the escalating costs, but we also need to make sure that we have the outcomes that all kids deserve.
All right, thank you. So we will start our next round of questions with Sharon Thompson, and our first candidate to answer will be Mead Treadwell.
Good evening. Our rural communities see the highest rates of child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence, and often have little or no law enforcement presence. The small police departments that exist here are chronically undertrained, underfunded, and understaffed. Statewide cuts to law enforcement or prosecution budgets have disproportional effects on rural Alaska. What will you do to facilitate more training, staff retention, and support for law enforcement and criminal justice so that rural Alaska is a safe place to raise our children?
Thank you for your question. I will say that during the time I was Lieutenant Governor, we had a policy, which is that every community that wanted a village public safety officer would have one. And I went to the Sitka Training Academy, worked with the VPSOs, and we need to be very strongly in support of VPSOs. I was with a friend here today who had lost a family member, and we armed VPSOs when I was there. I actually believe that we have to do much, much more for law enforcement, and a lot of it has to do with cooperation between the federal government and the state. I've met with police chiefs who have heroin in their evidence lockers that came into the towns via the mail, and the post office is not cooperating very well. In terms of funding, when you talk about child abuse issues, when you talk about family issues, I've been to Unalaska where they're saying it takes months to get somebody out from Anchorage to actually deal with problems, and we have to pay attention to our children. I would decentralize the system so that more resources go to rural Alaska.
All right, thank you. Mead Treadwell. We go to Governor Bill Walker.
It's a serious issue. Everybody in Alaska is entitled to feel safe, and whether you're in rural Alaska or urban Alaska. You know, one of the things that's been challenging is that the funding, we lose a lot of our troopers to King County because of the pay is better there. The benefits are better there. You know, when you continue to cut back and cut back and cut back, ultimately there's a price for that. And we're seeing that, and unfortunately, in public safety. We're looking at ways of trying to retain who we have. How do we bring more into our system? We have vacancies in our trooper system. On the VPSOs, we are working through the Governor's Tribal Advisory Committee, GTAC, as far as how we can work on that with the tribal organizations so that we can work through them and allow them to have a greater role in the VPSOs. You know, there's much more that can be done. One thing, we introduced funding for a 911 system. You know, only 2% of geographic Alaska can dial 911. You ought to at least be able to dial 911 in rural Alaska.
Next, Mark Begich.
It's a great question. You know, when you look at the FBI statistics and you read commentary by people around the country, Alaska is now considered one of the most dangerous states in the country. That's an appalling statistic and statement to think about, a place that I was born and raised in, my son's being raised in. When you look at the VPOs, the VPSOs, as well as the state troopers, it's not just that piece. You know, the courthouse now in Anchorage is down to 4 days a week. So you may arrest them, but you can't even prosecute them. You have 40 positions in the state troopers that are funded but not filled because they use an old style of how to recruit. When I was mayor of Anchorage, we had the exact same problem. We took it head on, put together a 90-day team. We did not sit here and task force it to death. We focused on how to solve this problem. We brought in all the pieces to the equation, not just one. When you talked about child abuse, sexual abuse, also mental health is a big piece of this equation, substance abuse. So it's a multifaceted approach. And again, the way it's worked in the legislature and the governor's office is one piece at a time. We have to approach these long-term and broad-based.
Mike Dunleavy.
Just very quickly, I just want to refer back to the last question. I mentioned that I would increase funding, and that's through cost shifting and reductions of healthcare cost. Is how we would do the shift the cost over. But in terms of the public safety issue, we're not one of the most violent states in the country. According to the FBI statistics, we are the most violent state in the country. And I'm not going to go through all the statistics that we lead the United States in. But being in rural Alaska for many years, I lived in communities where there was no law, and that is a problem. The primary function of a state is to make sure that its people are safe. And we have funding to shift into troopers and VPSOs. When we're doing fast rail studies in the Wasilla, Matanuska Valley for $5 million, and we have funding climatologists, and we're funding a whole host of other issues that are not primary functions of state government, we could use that funding to take care of our primary function, which is public safety.
All right, Scott Hawkins.
So I think there's several things that we need to tackle. There was a really disturbing article in the news today about village police officers and how there's really an alarming percentage of officers that actually are convicted sex offenders and have other rap sheets that would normally make them unfit for that job. But the problem is that they're administratively, we don't have a good, clear communication. New hires are supposed to be submitted to the state within 30 days by villages, and they're not. There's not compliance with that. So there's a lot of things we can do managerially. But the other thing really comes down to priorities. It's well known that we're the most dangerous state in the U.S., and with Senate Bill 91, things have really gotten further out of control. But public safety is really the #1 job of government. And so it comes down to priorities. We need to make sure that we are adequately resourcing. Whatever it takes, we have to adequately resource that function.
All right, so this ends our first round of panelist questions, and to kind of mix things up a little bit, we will have something called a lightning round, and it's meant to elicit a one-word answer. And some of these questions are fun, and so I'll pose the first one. What's your favorite kind of fish to eat? And just one-word answer. We begin with Bill Walker.
Well, I have to obviously go with silver salmon. My region is that.
Okay.
But I.
All righty, Mark Begich.
Salmon.
Mike Dunleavy.
King salmon.
That's 2 words.
Scott Hawkins.
Chinook.
You squeezed in an extra word. Scott?
Chinook, thank you for that.
Gravlax.
All right, so I want to know, what was the last off-the-road system community you visited? We'll begin with Mark Begich.
Well, the last one I visited, it was, I got to remember here, because I went to 3 up in the Kuskokwim area outside of Bethel.
One word.
Oh, one word. Well, there's several, so I'll just mention one of them. I want to say Selawik was one of them that I went to, but it wasn't in the region there, but Selawik.
Mike Dunleavy.
Kotzebue.
Scott Hawkins.
Kodiak.
Cook Inlet.
Oh, Kodiak.
Oh, Kodiak, I was there last
Oh,
week.
did you say Kodiak?
I did, Kodiak.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said Cook Inlet.
Tuesday.
That's a broad brush there. Mead Treadwell.
No, in the Arctic.
Bill Walker.
Nuiqsut.
All right, next question everybody wants to know. Everybody wants to know this one. Have you ever used a honey bucket? A yes or no answer. Just go down the row. I won't call on you, starting with Mike Dunleavy.
Yes.
No.
Yes, at 40 below.
Bill Walker.
Yes, for a long time.
Mark Begich.
Absolutely, yes.
All right, maybe we'll have another lightning round here, but let's go back to our panelists, and we'll begin with Scott Hawkins in this next round of questioning, and Lainey Welch will pose our next question.
Alaska produces over 3 billion pounds of fish wastes each year, which, if more fully utilized, according to a new report by the Alaska Seafood Marketing Association, could be worth in excess of $700 million each year to our state. For example, salmon heads, 1 billion pounds of salmon heads are produced. 1% of that is sold frozen. And recent reports show that in China, for example, over $5 a pound for fish heads, for salmon heads. The report said that just salmon heads alone could add an additional $100 million to the state's fishing revenues. The state offers tax credits to processors to develop more value-added products from salmon and herring, as a matter of fact. What can the state do to encourage more full utilization of fish wastes that would bring more money to local fishermen, local communities, and state coffers?
Well, Lenny, I think there's a carrot and a stick approach. I know here locally, Trident put in a fish meal processing plant, and there's some potential for that to accept waste from other local processors, and that was done under pressure from the Department of Environmental Conservation. And so that's an example of the stick. And it was very effective, and there might be lessons to be taken from that. The carrot is taking a look at those incentives. Are they sufficient? Are there other types of incentives we need to put on the table? But the principle of trying to reduce waste and get more revenue from our product is a sound principle and really is worthy of pursuing.
Mead Treadwell.
Thank you. I was a member of the Alaska Science and Technology Foundation when we funded some of the first work that developed protein powder from fish waste in Kodiak, where you live at Laney. I have been very active in developing cooperation in the Arctic, and I have helped encourage the ocean cluster system in Iceland to come to Alaska to help entrepreneurs who are working on various issues. We've been working with entrepreneurs who are interested in salmon leather. I usually wear a salmon leather belt. I don't have it on today. I got married in a salmon leather vest. There are tremendous opportunities for our entrepreneurs to bring new technology to market to help reduce waste. I support tax credits. I support state support of R&D. I'd like to see the Kodiak Fish Tech Center reestablished and working again. I'd like to see our universities be as porous as they can be, bringing knowledge from entrepreneurs in and getting more knowledge out to take care of this. If the pork industry can say we sell everything except the squeal, we can say the same thing about our fish, and we should.
Bill Walker.
Before I answer, I do want to clarify something that was said on the crime rate. The crime in Alaska began to rise in 2010, It's not something that just happened during the last 3.5 years. It's bad. We're doing everything we can, but I didn't want it left that all of a sudden we had this. This has been going on for some time. You know, I think the value added is critical for our industries. And I look at the numbers that you refer to, and it doesn't take a very big percentage to suddenly have a significant advantage. I think it continue to work. I think the brightest and smartest people are the fishermen, and I think that they're the ones closest to the fish, the closest to the solution as far as what else can you get out of that. Now, if they come to us and say, if we had this or that, we would be able to do that, I would be very much in favor. But rather than trying to second guess what those that are in the industry do, we certainly work with ASME on the marketing side. I would look to them and say, you bring us a solution, and we'll work with you in the market, or what you need to make that work within your industry.
Thank you. And we go to Mark Begich.
And Rhonda, for the record, it was Kodiak this week. I always think of them always on the road for some reason. It's easy to get there. Let me just say, I was just at the Trident plant earlier today and saw the efforts they are doing with creating powder and oils and so forth, taking every scrap of everything and utilizing it for a new product or new end products. I think you have to go to the industry, and I think you're right, because it used to be, and still is, where there's piles of this waste that is ending up in our waterways. I think there are great opportunities to add value, as we're seeing. The market is changing dramatically. We need to go to the people who produce this, find out what the products are that we can turn around. Also from the state end, I would have no problems in trying to incentivize through tax credits, using ADA for low interest loans in order to facilitate the capital improvement they have to have. But the marketing piece is very important, because you can have great product, but if you don't market it, no one's going to know about it. And the state has to be a partner in that, along with the industry. And the governor has a huge capacity to market and talk about the product every single day. Part of the job of his executive is to do that every single day on their state.
Thank you. Mike Dunleavy?
Work with the, I would work with the producers and the consumers, potential consumers, because as was mentioned, tastes are changing all over the world, and as the third world and China become more affluent, they're going to want more of our seafood products. So working with those two groups and trying to identify any bottlenecks or any regulatory or permitting processes that are in the way that we could change to help expedite, help facilitate this process for capitalizing and utilizing this fish waste, I think it'd be a start. And then taking a look at loans to help folks out, low-interest loans in this endeavor.
All right, thank you. Scott Hawkins? Or did we? That's right, you've already answered. I jumped ahead. So our next round of questions will come from Margie Bauman, and we begin with Mead Treadwell.
What is your take on the impact of climate change on employment in rural Alaska? And what would your administration do to increase employment given the climate change issues the state is facing?
Well, let me say that I've got three general thoughts about climate change. One is that we have to be very careful of what's happening with climate change in our food chain, especially ocean acidification. And I worry about what that can do for employment in rural Alaska. The second is that we have a number of communities that no longer have the ice barrier, need to be moved, and we need much better coordination between the state, the federal government, the tribes to make that happen sooner. But the third thing I want to say, and this is where I've tried to be a leader in my life, is that the world has given us an open, new, accessible ocean. Russia is bringing 16.5 million tons of LNG through the Bering Strait. We've worked on marine safety. We've worked on making sure that sealers aren't hit by these big tankers. We've worked on making sure that possibly you could bring some of this gas to reduce the cost of power for people. And we've worked to make sure that Russia doesn't have a monopoly in controlling fishing and that some of those jobs go to ports in northwestern Alaska. That's where I'm coming from with climate change.
Bill Walker.
Well, I appointed a committee on climate change to address the climate change issue. I get inquiries frequently about the impact of climate change in rural Alaska. The Kivalina is an example, Newtok is an example, so it's real and we need to address it. You know, as far as activities and the economy in rural Alaska, you know, I think there's much more that can be done. You know, I like what's being done in the Bristol Bay River Academy, the fishing academy that's done, where they take young people and help them become guides. And I look, rather than bringing guides in from outside of Alaska, we grow our own guides here. So I like that very much. I think we need to look at the opportunities that are there. Broadband, my goodness, we need broadband throughout Alaska. We are the most, 67% of our state is not covered with broadband. So there's much more we can do. Climate change is something we need to address. I'm concerned the federal government may not address it as aggressive as we will, so that may be something we need to take on.
Mark Begich.
Your question was on climate change and how it directly impacts employment. So there's two ends to it. First off, climate change, it's real, it's happening. You can argue why, but it's happening. Alaska is ground zero for it. So the negative impact, the fishing industry will definitely have impact. It's seen it through acidification of waters, warming of waters, fish patterns changing. We're seeing in the Arctic area the emissions of CO2 and what's happening with regards to the escapement. But it also can be an opportunity for us as a state, not only be the research center for the world when it comes to climate change, but also, as an example, when I was mayor of Anchorage, we decided it made sense, economic sense, it made environmental sense, and it made a difference in our climate to change out our light bulbs. Very simple thing with our street lights, the LED. But when you drive through Anchorage, you will see the state roads and you will see the city roads, because the city roads are with the new lights and the state roads have the old orange blinding lights that cost money and are expensive. One little simple thing you can do, but there's many other things. There's not a question of studying anymore. It's real, and we have a huge role as a state.
All right, thank you, Mark. All right, we go to Mike Dunleavy.
As mentioned earlier, I spent almost 20 years in the Arctic. That was my home. That's where we lived. And I think there's going to be a real opportunity. The climate change is happening. There's going to be a real opportunity for the Arctic. So much so that we may end up actually making, in some respects, the Panama Canal obsolete, because we're going to see shipping going north and going over the Northwest Passage to Europe and Asia. It's going to happen. We should start to prepare for it now, and I think there's going to be some tremendous opportunities for jobs. There's going to be some tremendous opportunities for our military presence up there, and it's going to open up parts of Alaska that have been inaccessible for some time in terms of developing our natural resources. So the sooner we start planning for it, the better off the state of Alaska is going to be and the people of rural Alaska.
All right, thank you. And finally, Scott Hawkins.
Thanks, Rhonda. Yeah, I think there are opportunities associated with the changing, the opening up of new shipping routes, at least some limited opportunities in terms of what would hit the shores here. But I think there's also a lot of opportunity for capital investment in infrastructure that is a result of some of the effects of global warming. For example, today I went out and looked at your wastewater treatment lagoons. I told you I got the full briefing on the sewer system, and those are in a location that are facing erosion, that are threatened by erosion here in the foreseeable future. And so there's going to need to be capital investment moving those lagoons further inland. And of course, you've got the examples like Newtok. And I think that addressing that needs to be cooperative. It needs to be done. The state needs to be a partner. It needs to be done with local boroughs, with village native organizations, and with CDQ groups. I think with a team, we can successfully address those challenges.
All right, thank you very much. And we now go to Bill Hill, Superintendent of the Bristol Bay Borough School District. For the next round, Bill Walker is the lead candidate in this round.
As a brand new teacher in the state of Alaska, I went to the Alaska Job Fair and faced 1,500 rivals at the Alaska Job Fair. This year, as a superintendent of Bristol Bay Borough School District, I went looking for candidates, and there were 150 or fewer who showed up in person at that job fair. Alaska traditionally has been a high-paid state for teachers, and that's no longer the case. In fact, we rank 28th out of 50 if you compare for the cost of living. And add to that the challenges of living in Alaska for a lot of people who are not used to it. We get a lot of our teachers out of state. We face a teacher shortage. Some districts were unable to fill those shortages this winter. What things do you think can be done to help solve this problem?
Bill Walker.
Well, a couple of things. One is I'm a big believer in growing our own teachers. I guess you're one of the best examples of that. Bill is going to reference that with you, what you do. You grew up here and the superintendent here. That's one thing. The second thing is the last 3 years, this year we funded education, forward-funded education, which was phenomenal. First time we've done that in many, many years. The last 3 years, pink slips have gone out. That sends quite a message that when pink slips go out to the teachers as far as the priority of education when you receive that pink slip. So we need to change our priority on education. We need to acknowledge the importance of the teachers in the process. And I know there's a lot of discussion about, cutting this and cutting that, but at some point we have to decide, what kind of a state are we going to be? How are we going to prioritize education? We have prioritized it as a very high priority in our administration, and so we have to share that with them so that Alaska is a good place to come and teach. So I'm aware of some of the layoffs, and I am very, very disappointed that we don't have ability to keep those teachers.
All right, we go next to Mark Begich.
Bill, I think there's three initial problems. First off, we aren't growing our own, and the university that in the last 4 or 5 years has been cut almost every single year, which is one of our training grounds. Second, I think you have a challenge with our teachers wondering at the end of the election cycle, and I say that because it's the cycle of the legislative body, are they going to have an educational program? They forward fund this year. Who knows what's going to happen next year because of the instability of the funding source. The goal of the university right now is only 30% of their teachers in this state are coming from homegrown, meaning out of our university system. Their goal is a 90% that. We should do everything we can to fund that goal, because the likelihood is if you fund and you ensure that people who live here, work here, grew up here are now a teacher, they will stay in the rural communities. We saw this with our dental health lab program for years. When you grow them locally, they stay. That's the goal. That's how you incentivize. But also the pay levels and benefits are a critical piece.
Mike Dunleavy.
Thank you. So again, this was my career, and back in 2001, we had an issue with teacher housing in rural Alaska. Unlike Anchorage, which could use $1 all of its money for instruction, rural Alaska could not. We had to build teacher housing. So we worked with our federal delegation as well as with AHFC, and we came up with a teacher housing concept in which there was a private-public partnership to build good housing to be able to recruit, retain teachers. Lake and Penn has a great program, and I was part of that, where they go out and they recruit teachers in the lower 48 that really want to be in Alaska. That's a great program that should be expanded. And also, I did run the FEA program with K-12 education in the University of Alaska, in which we were growing homegrown teachers, local folks, to become teachers through that program. By looking at expanding programs such as that, looking at the program that Lake and Penn does by going down the lower 48 and making sure that when teachers get here, they have a great place to live and a welcoming community, I think we can recruit and retain more teachers.
Scott Hawkins.
So I think recruitment there's an important role for recruitment, and particularly for homegrown teachers. You can start recruiting teachers in the school system when kids are still in high school, and kind of promote the benefits of the teaching profession. There are a lot of benefits of the teaching profession. I was raised by teachers, and I know what some of those are. But I think we also need to think about revamping the compensation structure. I mean, we have lost our edge, Bill, in terms of compensation really being an attractor to Alaska, particularly to rural Alaska. I think we should have a compensation system that rewards high-quality teachers and pays them a lot more, and has so that we have a little steeper progression in the pay scale for high-performing teachers. And I'd like to see that's a little bit more of a private sector perspective on it, but I think that would go a long ways towards recruiting and retaining really high-caliber teachers.
All right, thank you. And we now go to...
I didn't get a chance to...
Oh, I'm sorry. We go to Mead Treadwell.
Yeah. Bill, we talked about paying teachers more, and I think that's very important. I also just want to say that the University of Alaska has developed a teacher training program in the University of Alaska Southeast to build excellence and help build a bigger teaching cadre in the state. But I'm going to say this: the state of Alaska has not supported the university the way we need to support our university. We are a land grant university that never got its land. It came to the university and then went to the state, and the state has been balled up in some sort of constitutional argument, and the university is not getting the income it should have to build its programs. And I think we have to be much more serious about the University of Alaska to help grow our teachers. The other thing is, one of my favorite programs, something I've supported a whole lot at the UA, is the ANCEP program that brings kids from rural Alaska, shows them their career path in science and engineering. We should be doing the same thing with teachers in programs like Take Wing Alaska here in Southwest Alaska that have been tremendous.
All right, thank you. Our next questioner is Sharon Thompson, Executive Director of the Bristol Bay Borough Chamber of Commerce, and she leads off with Mark Begich.
Thank you. As a mother, I'm very concerned about the state of affairs within Office of Children's Services, which is constantly dealing with staff shortages and turnover, itself often operating in crisis mode. What is your plan to ensure that OCS has the capacity it needs for their mandate to keep our youngest, most vulnerable Alaskans protected?
Thank you very much, Sharon. And I will tell you, my sister, who works in a lot of education programs, I think every Christmas holiday there is someone there that we don't know, but she is brought in because she's spending time with young families who have challenges. And the OCS system, you know, you can see multiple audits, multiple reviews. The problem is it's a systematic, broken system. And putting money at it is important, but it is not the solution. It is only a piece of the puzzle. We have to step back and look at the whole system and revamp it. This is, again, one of the reasons I'm running is because people look at the issue from just get some money in it, solve it tomorrow. But the problem is it's a holistic problem. OCS by itself cannot be taken care of without taking care of the family in total. That means also in the educational system. When I learned here, your school doesn't even have a counselor anymore. That's a big part of the process. Now, some will say you don't need counselors in school to deal with family issues. Yes, you do. Teachers are no longer just teaching, they are part of the whole system. So I think there's money to be added, but you have to revamp the system to be more direct.
Mike Dunleavy.
The system, the OCS system is being overwhelmed by a whole host of issues. The opiate addiction issue, other drug addictive issues, alcoholism, et cetera, and we know that in rural Alaska. And in urban Alaska as well. So this system is being overwhelmed, and it is a holistic approach. I mean, we have to look at law enforcement, we have to look at what our court systems are doing. We have to have a discussion, a deep discussion the state of Alaska does, as to what we want, what type of future do we want for families and our children. And OCS is at the canary in the mine in terms of a system that's failing right now. We have to talk with those folks that are working in OCS, but also talk with families, talk with other, have discussions with other experts, but really take a look at what kind of Alaska do we want? Do we want an Alaska that is remediating or trying to fix problems, or do we want an Alaska that is going to have a vibrant economy, an excellent educational system, terrific public safety? Because I do think those are the things that are going to reduce these issues with OCS.
All right, thank you. Scott Hawkins.
So I don't think that it's practical to have to solve world hunger or address the opioid epidemic or anything like that in order to address the Office of Children's Services issue. OCS has been a thorn for many, many years. It has been mismanaged. It has been a factory for generating horror stories for year after year after year. And I think we need a governor that has some management skills and that can dive into that and say, all right, why does this office fail so consistently on an annual basis? And I think it's going to be a combination of processes, personnel, and a variety of other management issues, and of course, adequate funding. That has to be on the table, too.
Mead Treadwell.
Thank you again for the question. I said in an earlier question about this, we need to decentralize. And in rural Alaska, when you have to wait months to get help from the OCS, in a case of a child who is in a dangerous situation, we have to do a better job. That's number one. Number two, I disagree with Scott about the opioid crisis. I think the opioid crisis, I was in a meeting of a foundation today where we were dealing with children's issues this morning, and the opioid crisis, just even in suburban Anchorage and in the Matanuska Valley, has caused many, many more children's problems and challenges than anybody would have ever imagined. The level of cooperation between the state and the government, and I'm going to say something, Bill, I want to applaud your task force on the opioid crisis, but there is not enough cooperation yet between the state and federal government, especially the post office, to keep these things out of the state. And I just broke my ankle April 11th. I was given 3 big jars of opioid, and nobody follows through on the registration process.
All right,
and
thank you, Mead.
out there.
Governor Bill Walker.
You know, when our 4th child went off to school, my Donna, rather than coming back into the practice of law with me, she went to work for OCS as a caseworker. And she came back with some absolute horror stories. So I've heard firsthand some of the things that go on there. Their caseloads are multiples of what they are in the lower 48, multiples. Lack of funding, because we're trying to cut back on the budget. We lack of funding for that. One thing we did is we did a compacting this year. We signed it at AFN, a compacting between OCS, the state of Alaska, OCS, and each tribal organization to let the tribes have play a role and be a participant in that. And that's been very, very successful, and I think those are the kinds of things we need to be doing. But it really comes down to, you know, if someone has 3 or 4 times the number of caseloads that is the industry norm, that's a problem as well. You can only do so much, and I'm going to defend people that work at OCS. I know there's some horror stories, but there's a tremendous amount of good people that work at OCS, and I'm very proud of them. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, candidates. We are now a little more than halfway through our debate. We will go to 9 o'clock, and we want to let you know that you're listening to KDLG Radio in Dillingham, and we're also listening to KAKN broadcasting in Naknek. We want to thank them for carrying coverage of this. We are going to take a 2-minute break, and when we come back, we'll have a quick lightning round of questions, and then we'll go to the questions for the candidates in which they ask their opponent what they want to know, and that's usually pretty fun. So please be back in your seats. It's a quick break. We'll be back. All right, we want to welcome you back to the Bristol Bay Expo's debate, gubernatorial debate. We are so excited that we have all 5 candidates here, some of the major candidates, that they took the trouble to fly out here and be here with us. We also want to let you know that you are listening to KDLG Radio, broadcasting from Dillingham, and KAKN in Naknek. They are carrying live coverage. And also there is Facebook streaming on the Bristol Bay Expo websites. And KTVA, Channel 11, my channel, will on Monday post this entire debate, the video of it. So you can look forward to that in case you wanted to sort of see what happened. So I want to start off with a lightning round of questions, just quick answers. These are fun. And my question is, do you know any words in an Alaska Native language? If so, name one. And if you don't know any words in a Native language, what word would you like it to be that you would learn? And we begin this round with Mike Dunleavy.
Naga is Inupiaq Eskimo for no. And my wife says that a lot to me, so.
Naga. Scott Hawkins?
Naga, I thought that was a type of upholstery.
Do you have a word that you know?
I will confess, I do not have a native word. I know. Of course, there are names of places and things, but as far as an active word in the vocabulary, that's not that sort of thing, no.
Do you have a word you want to know in a native language?
Fiscal conservatism.
I'll tell you what, I'll give you one in Yupik, Jamai.
Is that one word?
Jamai, how's that one? So you got a word.
One more time?
Jamai.
Jamai, I love it, thank you.
All right, we go to Mead Treadwell.
Well, Scott, Shamai to rural Alaska. And I don't live here, but I come here often, and Chamai is my word. But the other thing that's amazing is there's so many Alaska Native words that have entered the English language, kayak being one of them, where the contributions to global society that come out of Alaska innovation is just tremendous, and I've worked to highlight that in many of my positions.
Bill Walker.
Ganeshish, Ganeshish, Ganeshish.
Mark Begich.
The Naina, which is the first people of the village I'm from, which is Anchorage. And I ended up naming the visitor center, the new convention center, after the first people, the first facility to recognize the first people of our community.
All right. So we have another lightning round question for you. If you were to give this past session of the legislature a grade, what would it be? And we begin this round with Scott Hawkins.
I would give this legislature a slightly above average grade, but that's based on a rather low curve. But I'd give it a B. Grading on the curve, because it did address some important things. This legislature made some important progress on tightening up some of the worst aspects of Senate Bill 91 on the crime and public safety side. And they also enacted Senate Bill 26, which is percent of market value legislation that allows for a structured draw on the permanent fund. And that was also important legislation. And they did manage to raise the dividend at least somewhat. They didn't go as far as I think they could have gone, but they're going in the right direction. So I would say, as legislative sessions go, a B.
Okay, we want to move on, so these are lightning round questions. So just, you get a pass on this one, but just one sentence to sum it up. Mead Treadwell, what grade would you give the legislature?
So what Scott is saying is that the grade went up when Mike Dunleavy left, I think.
What's your grade? We don't.
My grade is up to a C from a D. And I think they were very late with their papers in terms of keeping the promises that we worked hard to get incentives to fill more oil in the pipeline. Oil pays for these teachers. It's very important. It took a long time to get there. I agree on the POMV thing, as Scott said, and I think it's about time that we have a solid structured deal on the dividend, and that was not coming out of this year's legislature.
Thank you. Bill Walker?
I would certainly give them a B for a couple of reasons. One is that they took some tough votes, and you look at those votes, they were bipartisan votes. It was amazing what took place on several of those. The toughest votes were bipartisan. It was not down party lines, and I give them credit for that. They finished on time. There were no pink slips. And I do give credit to the House majority, and I think Speaker Edgman was a big part of making that happen. Without that change, I don't think we would have had nearly the kind of progress. So I thank you very much for that, Mr. Speaker.
Mark Begich.
You know, my son, who's now almost 16, tells me all the new grading methods, and that's to convince me he's doing well in school. But let me say this. I'm going to grade it in two ways. One, I think the House gets a B+. As a bipartisan group, they spend a lot of time trying to figure out the problems we face as a state. But I give the Senate a D- because of the uncooperation on their part in trying to find long-term solutions to our state, and that is what we need to be doing. I will say this on SB 91, it's easy to fix a problem you created, because that's what they did, and so I don't give them any good grade on that. And on 26, which is the PMV, that does not solve the problem. It still leaves it in the hands of the legislature to determine what your permanent fund will be, dividend, and how much they will spend out of the permanent fund earnings.
Okay, thank you. Mike Dunleavy?
I'd give them a C-, and since Mike Dunleavy left the Senate, spending has gone through the roof again at 13.9%. SB 91 wasn't repealed, and your PFD is still at risk.
All right, thank you very much.
I'm nervous we might agree here.
All right, so I have one more lightning round question, and this is, I want you to finish this sentence, and please be quick because you want to get to your candidate questions, right, to talk to your opponents. So this question is, once you pass on and go to the great beyond, what do you want on your tombstone? Here lies remembered for being... So we will begin this round with Mead Treadwell.
Happy Father's Day. I want to be known as a good dad.
Bill Walker.
Well done, good and faithful servant.
Mark Begich.
Mark Begich, good dad, good husband.
He was a decent guy.
Thanks, Mike Dunleavy. Scott Hawkins.
Good, stable father, husband, and somebody who worked year in and year out to try to move the needle in the right direction.
All right, before we move on to our candidate questions, we would like to thank the sponsors of this Bristol Bay Expo gubernatorial debate, and that is Alaska General Seafoods, Leader Creek Fisheries, the Bristol Bay Economic Development Corporation, and Coastal Villages. So let's give them a hand for helping us put this debate on. Now, in our candidate questions, each candidate gets to pose a question to their opponent, the one that they choose out of this group, just one opponent. And each candidate has 30 seconds to frame their questions, and then each opponent has 1 minute to respond. And the candidate who poses the question has 30 seconds then to have a rebuttal. You don't have to have one if you don't want to, but you do have that option. So we are going to begin our candidate round with Bill Walker. So you have 30 seconds to frame your question, and please announce the candidate that you are posing that question to.
To Mike Dunleavy, in 2013, you voted on one of the highest budgets in the state history at about $7.3 billion with a $1.6 billion deficit. Yet when it was reduced to about $4.5 billion, you voted against it and left the caucus because it was too high. I'm confused about your being a fiscal conservative based upon your votes for the highest budget with a $1.6 billion deficit.
So thank you for the question. So when I first got to the Senate, which was 2012, the budgets were high. But if you look at the curve, Bill, you'll see that the curve is pointed downward. And because the budget, especially in the welfare programs, continue to grow under your administration, it was something that's unsustainable. I made my case, voted no. That's what my constituents wanted. That's actually what Alaska wanted. So actually, I'm proud of that vote, but the curve has been downward since I was in the legislature. And as Mead pointed out, it's going up since I left.
Mark Begich, your turn to ask a question. Oh, I'm sorry, I got out of order here. So we go to Scott.
My response on the
30
Oh, I'm sorry,
rebuttal.
I was paying attention to timing and things and lost track. So
Well,
Bill Walker, rebuttal.
It's the second time I've asked you that question. I still haven't heard the answer of how you can vote for a budget that is $7.3 billion with a $1.6 billion deficit and still be a fiscal conservative. So I'm still waiting for that answer.
All right, thank you. We go to Mark Begich to pose a question.
Mine is for Scott Hawkins. Scott, you and I have talked before. We've known each other for a long time. You have a lot of business experience, and I'd be curious, as you're a candidate in the race, give me your feeling and your vision of where you see Alaska and what prompted you to get into the race.
Oh. Well, great. Thank you for that question. My vision for Alaska is a state that lives within its means, that is not #1 in the nation in terms of expenditures per capita, a state that provides for the basic needs and the core needs of its citizens, but it doesn't fund a lot of frivolous things that are unnecessary. In other words, we live within our means, and we do so with minimal or no taxes. Second of all, I'd like to see us get back to being a state with high-paying jobs and great opportunities. I know how to, with a background in economic development, I know how to create jobs. I know how to operate at that intersection between the private sector and the public sector, where everybody does the thing that they do best. And so I'd say that my vision is really a state that is once again a state where we can retain our best and brightest and have good opportunities and high-paying jobs.
Thank you. Mark, a rebuttal?
No rebuttal, except I want to say that one of the reasons I got into the race was for looking at what Alaska will be like in the next 20 years. I think there's a huge gap in this conversation over the last few months about Alaska and where, for example, my son will be, and your families, and your grandkids. And when I think about Alaska 20 years from now, I want to make sure it is a safe place, a strong economy, and making sure that we have the best education provided for generations to come.
All right, thank you. All right, we go now next to Mike Dunleavy to pose a question.
Thank you. This is for Bill Walker. Bill, in your mind, what is a sustainable budget mark for your unrestricted general fund? What is the actual number, and what is the percentage of growth that you think, under the current situation with our revenues, we could sustain?
You know, I think we're in the 4.3 billion is approximately where we are now, and I think that the question is that's still not we're still drawing from our savings account. We still have a deficit as a result of that. So we need to figure out what we want as a state, what kind of a state we want to have, and how we're going to pay for it. You know, it's great to be the only state in the nation without a broad-based tax, but we're also the only state in the nation that's living off of our savings account, and that is not sustainable. So. You know, the exact number certainly can fluctuate. We brought it down by spending by about 40%. So you know, we've come down a long ways, and now we're seeing some of the results of bringing it down. Some of the issues that have been raised tonight, you can only cut so far, and it starts to hurt. And some areas of Alaska are hurting as a result of that.
Rebuttal?
Yet climatologists, fast rail studies, not a significant reduction in certain redundant programs is still occurring, and that's at the expense of our core areas, and under your administration, this hasn't been abated.
Okay, Scott Hawkins, you have the next question.
Okay, my question is for Governor Walker. Governor, some have raised the question in your administration that you've brought onto your inner circle and your staff political operatives, you know, people like John Henry Heckendorn that have a background in campaign management, and put them on the state payroll. Are you comfortable that you've drawn the right line to separate legitimate state expenses from campaign expenses?
I have, and I don't discriminate because of what somebody used to do. Certainly there was never any sort of campaign activity by him while he was on state time. He's not a state employee now. And so I just, you know, I didn't say, no, you can't be part of this administration. He's a bright person. You know, we have a lot of bright young people that are involved in helping us make decisions and providing data and information to us. So no, I'm very comfortable with we have checked obviously thoroughly with all of our, you know, ethics folks to make sure that those lines have been crossed and there has been no line crossed.
Rebuttal?
No, I just wanted to know if he was comfortable with that line.
Okay, all right, thank you. So we go to our next questioner, Mead Treadwell.
Thank you. Scott Hawkins, we're in a fishing community, and I thought it'd be good to ask a question about commercial fishing, sport fishing, and both of us are in a Republican primary with Mike Dunleavy, and among his largest supporters are people who tried to outlaw set nets by initiative. Do you think this is an appropriate way to manage our fisheries?
Well, I think the initiative process can be very easily abused, and certainly using the initiative process to try to mess around with the set net industry is an inappropriate use of that. I think we need to crack down on the initiative process in general. As far as the backers of the independent expenditure group that Mike Dunleavy has, all I have to say is I'm kind of jealous. I wish I had a brother with that kind of wealth that could help fund my campaign.
Well,
Rebuttal?
Yeah, I have a brother who's a carpenter and a brother who's a teacher, and they're going to give what they can afford as well. But it was Bob Penny's effort to outlaw set netting, commercial set netting by initiative, which I rejected as lieutenant governor. I was sued. The lower courts overturned me. The Supreme Court backed me up. And the fact is that we do have gear conflicts, and we do have sport fishing versus commercial fishing conflicts in the state. The way to solve them is with science. The way to solve them is with bringing people together. And the way to solve them is not using a blunt instrument where one mass population can put hundreds of commercial fishermen out of business.
All right, thank you. Please hold your applause until the very end. All right, we're going to begin our next round of questioning, and we'll start off with Mark Begich. Okay. Who would you like to pose a question?
Well, actually, just listening to this, I have a question for Senator Dunleavy, but I'm going to make my question short because I've seen these campaign tricks before where they ask each other and they leave the poor guy out who should respond. Now, I don't agree with his position on the set net. Let me get that straight. But my first is really just a simple question. Why do you oppose, you brought it up several times, on fast rail, which would actually benefit the community that you represented in Mat-Su. If it was done correctly, you could actually take 30,000 people off the road, which means it will help save our environment, save our roads, and we would not have to have that problem. But also will leave time if you want to respond to their back and forth that they did to you.
The fast rail issue should not be a priority for the state of Alaska. When we have the public safety issues that we do, when we're cutting the PFD, when we have the educational issues, including the funding issues that came up, we shouldn't be dedicating $5 million to a study. Bill Walker, when he ran for office, said he was done with studies. And I am from the Valley, and I got to tell you, driving an hour from my house to go to a train depot, to get on a train that may go 45 miles an hour, to go to downtown Anchorage, and then I have to call an Uber or get a cab to go where I want to go to work, doesn't make a lot of sense in this environment right now. And so that's the reason I bring up the fast rail study, and that's just one of many expenditures that this current administration is involved in that is costing the state a lot of money.
There was an earlier question on climate change, and when you think of rail systems, for example, in urban areas, or you think about renewable energy in rural Alaska, these are all part of the equation to create a new economy, a different way of looking at things, and a long-term benefit. I'm staying at a place here that has solar panels taking care of their energy needs. That is an incredible opportunity to create jobs and looking at things in a much different way than traditional ways that have been looked at in the last decade plus.
All right, Mike Dunleavy, you get to pose the next question.
So this is a direct question, actually, to Mead Treadwell, not through Scott. Mead, are you for protecting the full, I'm going to word this very carefully so we get a direct answer, are you for protecting the full historic PFD calculation? If so, when did you publicly state your position on this? And was it before June 1st?
My position before June 1st and my position after June 1st is the same. Scott, Mike, I supported the POMV concept, okay? The question of the formula within the POMV is one that was up to the legislature to look at. I don't like the way the legislature did it. They took your PFD and they turned the whole thing into a political football. I did not support Governor Walker's rejection or his veto of the permanent fund, and I believe we should stick with the formula. The question of whether or not the formula goes into the Constitution, which was not part of your question, but I'll answer it, is one that is up to the legislature. And it could be a 50-50 deal, it could be a 70-30 deal, as Scott recommends. I believe we have to have a formula that does not make the PFD a football, and the permanent fund income can both give us a solid dividend, a good, solid, full dividend with a formula that Alaskans support and understand, and it can give you a way to avoid taxes.
All right.
So the rebuttal is simple. If you're supporting a POMV concept, that means you're in support of changing the historic calculations. So I just want to make sure that we're clear.
Scott Hawkins, it's your turn to pose a question to the candidate of your choice.
Boy, I wish I could have answered that last one. My question is for Mark Begich. Mark, the state, the budget deficit was closed significantly this year with the Senate Bill 26 and the structured draw, but there's still a multi-$100 million deficit depending on your assumptions on oil prices. Do you believe that the state needs new revenue, and if so, what sorts of new revenues would you support?
Yeah, I would approach this in three ways for you, Scott. And the first thing I would do, I get to answer this because I think it's important, and that's I would constitutionally guarantee the dividend at 50%. 10% inflation proofing, and 40% going to education, so the politicians in Juneau cannot meddle with the money, because the way it's designed right now, they can do anything they want with that program because it's not set every year they get to play with it, and that's a dangerous thing. And second, I would also, as I suggested some ideas on OCS and others, that you have to first look at how to restructure the government in order to make it deliver the services for what people are paying for it. And third, we're probably going to have some revenue issues, but I would work with the community, I would work with the legislature. I wouldn't just show up, like for example, with a wage tax and just say, this is what we're going to do. You would sit down with people and figure out what the right thing is, exactly the way I did it when I was mayor of Anchorage. We grew the economy, made it safe, but partnered with the community to make sure we did the right way. 40% of our tax growth was from new economic development. That's the approach we need to have, not this piecemeal approach or leaving it to a bunch of politicians to figure it out.
Rebuttal?
Yeah, so that formula of guaranteeing 50% of the dividend, the rest going to inflation proofing and education, that really does back us into a corner and force us to look at a broad-based statewide tax. So that is a formula for a personal income tax or a sales tax or both. And I think there's a better approach to that.
All righty, Mead Treadwell, you're up next.
I'd like to ask Governor Walker, you just talked about your climate change task force. I was at a workshop at the beginning for the scoping of it. I said we really have to work on technology. And then I read the document that came out, and they said Alaska has to get on the road toward a carbon tax. What is your position on a carbon tax, and why do you think Alaskans need to pay more for energy?
You know, I appoint a lot of board and commissions, about 1,500 folks that each year on board and commission. We have over 120. And I don't agree with everything that they come back with. They come back to me with recommendations, and I give them that. I don't tell them what to do, what to think. They're smart people. I'm not in favor of a carbon tax. I don't think we need to pay any more for our cost of energy. We should go the other direction. We're the most energy-rich state in the nation with the highest cost of energy, and I'm working daily to bring the cost of energy down, not go the other direction. So I'm not in favor of a carbon tax.
Well,
rebuttal?
My rebuttal is I'm glad to hear that, because your lieutenant governor was in the New York Times as saying Alaska is now considering a carbon tax. We're a state that's known for cold, dark, and distance. And we have to use energy to make those things livable for us. And to tell Alaskans we're going to raise our cost of energy rather than lower our cost of energy, and to work hard to bring the kinds of investments in new technologies that will lower our cost of energy is where we have to go. I support making sure that we have the opportunities on climate, but I think the whole idea of joining this global crusade to make energy cost more when Alaskans have no alternative. I can't drive a car that's not an SUV because I live at the bottom of an icy hill. And for this report to come out and go tell the whole rest of the world we need a carbon tax, Governor, means that you want Alaskans to pay more, you want our energy industry to cost more, and it's not the way we should have been dealing with the climate issue.
And I do not support a carbon tax.
Thank you. All right, Bill Walker, which candidate do you want to question?
Well, I'm tempted to ask Mead a question now, but...
Oh, you haven't... That was a long question. It almost seemed like...
Well, I'm gonna ask Senator Mike Dunleavy, Senator Dunleavy a question. You know, you talk about reducing the budget, and it needs to be done on health care. And I know I accepted Medicaid expansion, so 42,000 Alaskans could have health care coverage. That has brought in almost $1 billion of revenue to the state, and it has reduced our cost of health care by $16 million. So I'm wondering where exactly in the health care would you reverse? I know I knew I was going to get sued. I did. We prevailed in that litigation that I had the authority to provide the health care coverage for 42,000 Alaskans. Where in the public health or in the health service would you specifically be making the cuts?
So several years ago, I introduced a bill that would consolidate the insurance of the 54 school districts. There was a report done, a study done on that bill and the cost savings that could come from it. The study demonstrated that you could save approximately $100 million a year going forward by consolidating those school districts. So, I mean, that's an example, Bill, that the state could employ, which would not cut insurance for employees and would cost the state less money. Those are the efficiencies that we have to look at going forward. We can't continue to do business as usual, which is occurring right now.
You know, when we had a $2.7 billion deficit, there was a lot of effort on trying to find savings here and savings there. In the process, while you were in the legislature, you drew down $14 billion from our savings rather than addressing the revenue side. So we are $14 billion less as a result of sort of the wait and see and sort of pick apart at various issues that are much smaller in dollar amount than the magnitude of the $3 billion a year deficit that we were in.
$100 million?
All right, thank you very much. We now are going to take some questions from members of the community that pre-submitted them. And this one is from the Coastal Villages Regional Fund. And they want to know, what does the theme of this debate, sustaining rural communities, mean to you? And also define what sustainability means. You have 1 minute to answer. We begin with Mike Dunleavy.
For me, it means that you have a quality of life in which you want to stay in a certain location in rural Alaska. And that quality of life needs things like good public safety, good schools, economic opportunities, jobs, resource development. This is how you're going to sustain any community, rural Alaska or urban Alaska. But as mentioned before, most of our resources come from rural Alaska. And so the sustainability component has to have all of those, sustainability issue has to have all those components within it. Because if you don't feel safe, if you don't have a job, if your schools aren't working the way they're supposed to, you're not going to want to stay in a place and you're not going to have a sustainable community.
Scott Hawkins on sustainability.
Sustainability, in large part, is economic sustainability, because without an economic base, it's really hard to support much else. I have been impressed as I've learned more about the CDQ groups and how they've really increasingly utilized the resource that Senator Stevens provided for them through the CDQ program, and how they're turning those into programs that result in sustainability. Things like vocational training, helping people develop skills that they could qualify for jobs and not have to leave the community. That's a very sustainable program, that CDQ program, and as those groups can increasingly use those revenues for things that result in employability and economic base for the communities, it's a great example of what sustainability can look like.
Mead Treadwell.
I'm going to go back to one of Alaska's great sustainability arguments, which was the time of statehood. We almost became a state in 1952. We did not become a state in 1959. And if you look what changed on that, there were two things. One, we got 103 million acres of land. And second, we got control of our fish and game. And we've seen the federal government try to take away control again and again. They're doing it where we may have to amend the Magnuson-Stevens Act to make sure we can control our salmon. And we see them doing it again and again with our land and taking away power over our land. We have two permanent funds. We need to have a permanent economy. The permanent fund that we have with $60 billion in it is very important. The land grant that we got as a state is worth trillions, and we're not doing what we need to do to build the economy of Alaska, to put people to work, to make sure that all these parts of the state have that, because that's what the intent of that land grant was in the first place, was for us to be able to sustain our economy, and we can do it by sustaining our natural wealth as well as our personal wealth.
Bill Walker.
To me, sustainability in rural Alaska means that a young person can be born here, raised here, and remain here and have employment and have a future, have a reason to raise a family here and not have to go into a different region. So it's a matter of making sure that there's the growth. I mean, without growth, we fall back, we fall behind, and we have not had that. And so until we get our fiscal house completely in order, it's going to be challenging to do that. We have to do a few more things in order to be able to ensure that Alaska is stable financially going forward. We can no longer tie our entire revenues associated with what the price of the barrel of oil is. So, to me, it's a matter of giving the tools available for the local communities to thrive, to grow, to survive, that they can be affordable. Some of the cost of energy in rural Alaska is absolutely unsustainable. We need to make sure that they have the communication system that I've talked about earlier. So, it's a matter of making sure that we have one Alaska rather than the haves and the have-nots in Alaska.
All right, and Mark Begich.
I would see this in three ways for sustainability. It's divided up in economic, the economy, the environment, and culturally. Because you can have great jobs, great opportunity, but if you don't have a fabric of a community, meaning its culture, what it's about, its history that you've learned from, and move it forward, you don't have a full community. From the environmental side, we've talked about a little bit tonight about climate change. If we don't deal with these issues, we see erosion. We talk about the lagoon that's in trouble because of its risk of erosion, what could impact it. We think about the energy costs that we have in this community and all throughout rural Alaska. We have a great PCE trust program that ensures residents, but when you look at businesses and schools and hospitals, they still pay an enormous amount for energy. So when I look at sustainability, the debate is not just about the moment of issues that we're debating here, but how do we see the community or the state 7 generations from today? And I see it as a strong economy, environmentally safe and sound community, but culturally thriving and strong. That's how I see it.
All right, we're going to take one more question that was submitted in advance from community members, and then at the end of this debate, we will take questions from the audience. So This question was submitted from the United Tribes of Bristol Bay. We see declining king runs in many rural Alaskan rivers. What will your administration do to help this? And we'll begin with Scott Hawkins, and just expedite things, 45 seconds for a response.
Okay, address the
salmon shortages, the king salmon.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most important things we need to do is take the science very seriously and send very high caliber people. One of the to the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council. One of the most important jobs the governor has on these types of things is naming 5 of the 9 members of the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and we need to make sure that delegation is the A team, and they have a lot of respect for science, and that they are they're leaning forward and very proactive on issues like this. The king salmon issue is there's still a lot of uncertainty about it scientifically, and all the different agencies need to cooperate and tackle it together based on a foundation of solid science.
Mead Treadwell.
Well, thanks for talking about science, Scott. I was head of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, helped establish the North Pacific Research Board, have worked very hard in many different ways to make sure we've got independent science capability for our fisheries and more long-term stable funding for that. I also, as Lieutenant Governor, went to Bethel, looked at issues on the Kuskokwim, and I've fished on the Yukon. I've been to fish camp on the Yukon, and I can tell you that we have to make sure that Fish and Game Management includes people from tribes who are part of the assessment process. The better trust there is, I think the better understanding that we're going to have with what the solutions are. Offshore interception is still an issue in some places, and we've got to watch that as well.
Bill Walker.
We have to have the best science. We need to have the best technology, the best, fish counting methods. We need to be the best there is. We have the best. I think we have one of the best fisheries in the world, and that's because we manage it based upon science. We don't make popular decisions. I have been in a situation, I've been asked if I would make a decision involving fish opening and closure, and I said, absolutely not. I'm not the scientist. The scientists need to make those decisions. I'll stand behind you, you make the decision, but make sure you're making it with the best information available. If that means reaching out to those in the region, people with their boots in the water, let's do that. But it's a matter of having the best information. And we had a 30% reduction in our fish and game budget. That doesn't help. So we need additional revenues to be able to make sure we have the best technology.
Mark Begich.
I think there's several things you can do. There are some issues. When I was in the United States Senate, we made sure treaties were done to ensure some of this, what I call pirate fishing, that was going off our coast. But as a governor, we have to make sure those are being adhered to and followed, and putting the pressure on the federal government. I think we need to continue to partner with NOAA where we can on stock assessments that may impact us in the waters. On top of that, everyone's agreed best science is important. We should put that into the law like the federal government has, which we do not have in the state law. On top of that, one thing I will never, ever forget as a young assembly member in Anchorage, sitting over at the UAA facility, we were talking about climate change. No one wanted to talk about it back then, but it was the elders who told us what was happening before the scientists recognized what was happening. So the combination of those two, I think, is important for us to understand where we're going to go with king salmon.
Mike Dunleavy.
There's no doubt our king runs are down, not just here, but all over the state. And it is going to be science that's going to be able to solve this problem, hopefully sooner than later. You have to have the right people in place that want to take this issue seriously. And as governor, it's going to be a top priority to make sure that our resources, our fish stocks, our game stocks, are at the levels that Alaskans expect. So you got to hire the right people, you got to put the right people in place, you got to depoliticize things, and you definitely have to use science. That's what's going to solve this issue.
All right, thank you. I'm going to start another round of questions here. This is one of my own. It's a two-parter question. And I'll begin this. I'll go a little bit out of order, but I'll begin with Scott Hawkins on this one. Is it still possible for people to achieve the Alaskan dream, in your view? Or what are the challenges with that today as opposed to yesterday? And what's your dream for Alaska? And you each have 1 minute to answer.
Okay, so I get to start off twice in a row. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we're mixing it up a little bit.
All right, all right. Is it still possible to live the Alaskan dream? I believe that it's still possible. but it is much more difficult than it used to be. It's possible for some. There are still opportunities out there. If you prepare yourself well through school and get the right training and the right education and really work hard, it is still possible to live the Alaska dream, but it's too difficult. And not everybody is able to do that. The problem is that we have lost tens of thousands of high-paying jobs in recent years. And even if you go back to the last 20, 25 years, our economic performance has been pretty flat. We have had net out-migration in Alaska more years than we've had net in-migration, and that's a function of a rather flat economy. And so it's very important that we bring back high-paying jobs, that we stimulate our major industries, and that we also find new niches, new opportunities to create high-paying jobs.
Mark Begich.
Well, first, I do believe you can still achieve the Alaska dream here, but it is sad to hear when I see my son, who's, as I said, 15 and a half, telling me recently, it's one of the reasons I'm in this race, is he said to me, Dad, I don't see a future for me here. When I go off to college, I may not return. That's a sad commentary. When you look at your visioning report that you've done for this region, over half of the community wants to have their people go out of state but come back to their community. I do believe the Alaska dream is possible. But we have to think about it and give hope to people. I think the political process in Juneau does not do that. All it does is people fighting, arguing over stuff that's irrelevant, but yet important in the moment, but not relevant to the long term. We have to give people hope that when I see young people talking to me about the blue economy, our fishing industry, one of the greatest industries we've had for year in and year out, you rarely hear about it in the commentary about our growing economy, tourism, air transportation, small tech that I'm seeing. I see this all over the state from young people who see and believe in what we have, and we have to help them get there.
Mike Dunleavy, go ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a tremendous future here in the state of Alaska. I came up in 1983, and this place was roaring like a lot of you did. The opportunities are unbelievable if we have the right leadership and policies in place. Everything below the ground, everything in the ocean, everything growing on the ground, such as trees, hasn't changed in the last 40 or 50 years. We have more oil finds in the last few years than we have previous. We have 1/7 of the timber in the entire country here in the state of Alaska. We have tremendous opportunities, but if you have the right leadership in place, the right policies, the right regulatory policies, the right taxation policies, there's no reason why our economy can't be humming like everybody else's in the lower 48. At 7.3% unemployment, this is incredible for Alaska with all the resources we have. We are the richest state in the country. We just need to know how to develop those resources and make it happen.
Okay, we're going to mix it up a little bit and go to Bill Walker for the Alaskan Dream.
Boy, I cannot say enough positive things about the future of the state of Alaska. The dream is very much alive. I witness it every day. You know, I go to the under 40 celebration every year where the young people that are under 40, the businesses that they've owned, they've started. Last year I gave out the Manufacturer of the Year award to a 14-year-old who invented a device that is now being sold in REI. You know, the opportunities in Alaska with $4.7 trillion of resources in the ground and in the ocean are unlimited. You know, we just need to look beyond and into the grasp that's available to us. Having just spent 10 days in China, I can tell you there is an unlimited opportunity, limited only by our imagination as far as the market out there. You've got to talk to the market. You've got to look at the need for what we have in Alaska. You can't sit back and watch the phone and hope it rings. You got to go and meet with these folks. That's what I did. Alaska, the dream is very much alive and well for Alaska's future.
All right, and Mead Treadwell.
So it's not my Alaska dream, it's your Alaska dream. If you want to come here and fish, there ought to be a way to get the money to buy a permit and fish. If you want to live in a cabin way out there, you can do that. There's plenty of room to do that. But the impediment to the Alaska dream is governments that don't keep their promises. We didn't get the 90-10 that we were promised with statehood. We didn't get all of the land grant as I mentioned, for the university. We haven't stood up to the federal government on getting more power and control over our land during the last 4 years. We've been very nice with the federal government, and we haven't taken on what we need to do. As a state, we didn't live up to our promise on the permanent fund dividend formula. We didn't live up to our promise. We invited dozens of new producers to find oil on the North Slope and then refused to pay them for 4 years, and didn't work out a financing plan until the last year of this administration. It's time that we have government keep its promises, and you will be able to find your Alaska dream.
All right, thank you. So we started out the debate with opening statements, and Mark Begich got first crack. So we're going to go down to the end to Governor Bill Walker and then work our way back to Mark for final statements. You have 1.5 minutes.
Okay. As governor, I've had to make some very difficult decisions. You know, the issues that I inherited were unprecedented. The deficit I inherited was unprecedented. So I ran for governor to clean up the mess that was there, and that's what I've been doing day in and day out. I've had to make some very difficult decisions, and I don't regret the decisions I've made. They were not pleasant in any way. I have had to look at the long-term picture of the state of Alaska. You know, my background is to solve problems, to bring people together, to work collaboratively, and this last session is certainly an evidence of that. We didn't get all we wanted on the dividend. We protected the fund itself, and that's phenomenal. That was the goal. Now we need to protect the dividend itself, and that's the next step, and that's what we will do, whether it's by statute or by constitution. I would support that. But what I want to say is this. I grew up in a community that when the fire started, everybody in the community ran to the fire. And when I found in Juneau is when there was a fire in the fiscal situation, many people ran from it. They ran from it. Some resigned, some quit. I did not. I ran to it. That's my job. I made the tough decisions. I take the heat for the decisions, but my goal is to fix Alaska for the next generation and generation after that and generation after that. Yes, I've had to make some difficult decisions. Yes, we had to leave some money in the money that was reduced on the dividend went back into the fund, much like you do on fishing. On a sustained yield for fishing is exactly what we had to do on the fund. It will grow. I don't support a cap. I think the cap should be taken away. It should be whatever we can make it be. But yes, I've made some tough decisions, and if I have to pay the price for it, I'm glad that I made the decisions I have made, and I stand by those that helped make those decisions, because Alaska deserves nothing less.
Mead, Treadwell.
Thanks. I just want to say that Alaska is a great place because we stand on the shoulders of giants, men and women who fought to bring power and control home when outsiders controlled our fish traps and when Alaskans couldn't take advantage of the opportunities here. We had a 200-mile limit. Thank Ted Stevens for that. We had good science capability. I've worked on that for 40 years. We got control over anadromous fish. We got to Americanize our fisheries. We got to have an appropriate program of division of the wealth with CDQs. And Scott, you mentioned it was Senator Stevens. It was actually Governor Hickel, Clem Tillion, Glenn Reed is here in the room, John Walsh is here in the room. All of us worked very, very hard with communities here across the state to establish those programs. We need a governor who will stand up for the constitutional promises that Alaska was given, who will see that it's not just a squabble over how we pay our bills, but bring people together on that and to stand up for the promises that we were given as a state that give us the economic opportunities, that give us the control to make the tough environmental decisions that we've got to make, that give us the opportunity to raise our children in an area that is so special, so magnificent, that I wouldn't want to live anywhere else, and I don't think any of the rest of you would either. Thank you very much.
Scott Hawkins.
Thank you, Rhonda, and thank you, everybody, for your attendance this evening. This has been an enjoyable forum. I take a practical approach. I don't have a lot of soaring rhetoric for you. I just know that there are really three main things that we need to focus on in this state. One is getting our crime wave under control, and that means returning meaningful penalties for things like theft and drug dealing and those sorts of so-called nonviolent crimes. We have become a magnet state for people, for drug addicts, for thieves, for people who don't want to work, and that we're seeing we're seeing the effects of that all across the state, and we need to turn that around. We need to look at our law enforcement policies. We need to look at our overly generous social welfare policies. We need to look at the amount of time it takes to qualify for a permanent fund dividend and look at extending that. We need to get serious about being a state that can attract and retain our best and brightest, not attract and retain the sorts of people who really don't want to work. So I think that's a very important point. Secondly, we need to get our fiscal house in order, as we have talked about at some length tonight. And third, bring back high-paying jobs. I have a background in doing that. I know how to do it. I've structured economic development deals that still today employ well over 1,000 Alaskans. This can be done. We can get this state back on track.
Mike Dunleavy.
The only thing deeper than the fiscal gap in Juneau and in the state of Alaska is the credibility gap, the trust gap with government. You're going to hear a lot of things over the next couple of months. This is campaign season, folks. This is going to get very interesting. And you really want to stop and think just for a moment. You want to look at an individual's record. You want to see where they actually voted and how they voted. You want to see what they've said and what is printed and on the record. You want to not be fooled by some of the rhetoric you may have heard tonight, and you certainly are going to hear in the future. Where do people really stand on the PFD? Where do people really stand on reducing the size of government? Where do people really stand on taxes and revenues? You're going to hear all kinds of doublespeak, but in the end, Alaska can be a fantastic place for not just us, but our children and our grandchildren. As I mentioned before, we have the resources in the state of Alaska. We are the richest state in the country. We're the greatest state and the greatest country on the face of the earth. And the only difference right now is the leadership and the policies that are in place. If we have the right leadership and the right policies, we can make Alaska work for us. We can have fantastic paying jobs, a safe Alaska with great educational outcomes. But pay close attention to what people say, and then take a look at their record. Some folks don't have a record. They want to pretend that they do, but they don't. Take a look at an individual's record. Thank you.
Mark Begich.
First off, thank you, Rhonda. Thanks to all the panelists and the folks who are listening, who are probably sitting at their radio saying, I want to ask this question. And you did a great job in trying to get as many questions to all of us and to the audience here. You know, when I think about it, I look at the state in the broad perspective, you know, the highest crime rate in the nation. While the rest of the country is moving forward, we have the highest unemployment by double. We've lost over 3,000 people leaving our state, and now most recently young people are leaving because they see no hope and opportunity here. We're now ranked lower in education than ever before. Our university has told us recently we're at the bottom of people moving on to higher education in the country. This is not the state that I know that I grew up in. But your question that you asked earlier, Rhonda, to achieve the Alaska Dream really goes to why I'm in this race. I believe what's possible. But leadership is not just about dealing only with the day-to-day, but helping people see the future, see where the next step is, making sure we're a safe and strong community, making sure we have the best education for young people and their families for the generations to come that want to be here and stay here. Job opportunities that are broad-based, not just natural resources that are non-renewable, but fishing and air transportation, healthcare, the fastest growing industry in our state. I can go through the list. We have so much opportunity in this state, and I just feel the last 4 or 5 years, it's been lost because people have been caught into the mud, 8, 9 special sessions because they can't cooperate with each other. I want to bring my skills and know-how, innovation, and new ideas to help move Alaska to the next level in the new century.
All right, now you can applaud. And they should get applause for coming out here. We've come to the conclusion of our debate in Naknek today, hosted by the Bristol Bay Fish Expo. All of the proceeds go to early childhood care at the Little Angels Academy. So another round of applause for the Bristol Bay Fish Expo.